What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video, and in today's video we're going to be talking about X-Men Apocalypse. Before we get too far into this, if you guys did not see my review for Halo, I am currently on a little vacation for a wedding at the moment, and I still wanted to be able to put out some videos, but I don't have any of my equipment with me, so I'm just filming this straight with the audio of the camera itself. I don't have my mic with me, I don't have my ring light. I'm using this little lamp that's on this hotel table here in front of me to kind of give some sort of lighting, but I do apologize about the lesser quality than my usual reviews, but I wanted to continue to have content rolling out on the channel, as I have a lot of stuff that I have planned for the channel. And today I'm very happy to be joined by Jacob Martin as we continue on my X-Men series of reviews, now with X-Men Apocalypse, a film from 2016 that I remember being about when I walked out of the theater, and it was interesting to revisit the film. I think this was like my fourth time seeing the movie, and I have a lot of thoughts on the movie, a lot of positives, a lot of negatives. This is a movie that is definitely lower on the totem pole for me when it comes to the X-Men films, but nowhere near the bottom of the barrel in comparison to some of the other stinkers that we've gotten in this series. With that said, again, I want to say a big thanks to Jacob Martin for joining me for this installment of the X-Men series of reviews. We only have a few more after this, including Logan, Deadpool, and Deadpool 2. I already covered things that came out while my channel had already begun, things like Dark Phoenix, Once Upon a Deadpool, and New Mutants. So I already have reviews for those up on the channel. So we only have a few more left here on the channel, and I'm really excited to get to tackling these and getting them up on the channel. So let's get to this. X-Men Apocalypse is directed by Bryan Singer and stars a returning cast of people like James McAvoy, Michael Fassbender, Jennifer Lawrence, Nicholas Hoult, and so many others, and brings us new faces to the series by people like Oscar Isaac, Sophie Turner, Ty Sheridan, Cody Smith-McPhee, Ben Hardy, and many others. This film is once again composed in terms of its music by John Ottman, who's given us some great scores for this franchise and gives us another great score for this movie right here. So before we get too far into this, what I want to say is when I first saw this movie in theaters, I was disappointed. I remember thinking to myself, wow, I expected this movie to be so much better than it actually was. I didn't hate it, I didn't dislike it, and I still don't hate it, and I still don't dislike it. But without a doubt, this is definitely one of the weaker main X-Men films for me. It's not at the bottom of the list, but yeah, it's definitely not one of my favorites. I would say that Dark Phoenix that followed this up is definitely the weaker installment of the prequel era of these different X-Men films. One thing that we have to address is moving forward after Days of Future Past. From what I understand, from what people have said, part of the continuity issues that we'll start to see with this film and things like Dark Phoenix have to do with the fact that Days of Future Past rewrote the timeline, so essentially kind of undoing the original 3 X-Men films, making the events of this film and Dark Phoenix not necessarily having to be in line with those movies, which for me is stupid. If you saw my review for Days of Future Past, you know that I thought that movie had the perfect ending, and quite frankly, I think that that's where they should have ended the series. I think it would have been the perfect little bow on top. And honestly, the fact that they continued beyond that is honestly beyond me. I think it completely sidelines and just completely messes up what Days of Future Past and First Class and the films before that had done, and to push forward with a film like this and just have all these continuity errors is just ridiculous. And a lot of the continuity errors mainly have to do with actors and the various roles that they're playing, and seeing where certain characters are in the timeline at this point that just doesn't match up with what we would see in the original 3 films. One of the most notable things about this franchise specifically when it comes to the prequel films is that they all take place in a different decade. First Class takes place in the 60s, then we go to the 70s for Days of Future Past, and now with this one, Apocalypse, we're in the 80s. And in these films, they do reference the events of the previous films and always kind of reference them like, oh yeah, that was 10 years ago or something along those lines. And they do that multiple times in this film, as this film does take place specifically 10 years after the events of Days of Future Past. And ultimately, I think it just leads for this movie to be just confusing. Are all these movies completely honest? This movie takes place in the 80s, and the next movie, Dark Phoenix, takes place in the 90s, and the original X-Men film came out in the early 2000s. It makes zero sense, really, when you think about it. How in the hell do they go from being James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender to Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen within 10 years. It just doesn't make any sense. It's worse than how Obi-Wan Kenobi goes from Ewan McGregor to Alec Guinness from, Revenge of the Sith to A New Hope. It's just ridiculous, the kind of aging that we have going on here. So the fact that they really don't age at all in all of these decades in these prequel films, and then we're supposed to believe that they just, turn into these old men and much older versions of all of these characters in just 10 years after the events of Dark Phoenix really makes zero sense. I really wish they hadn't jumped around the timeline everywhere and kind of given us these various decades. I know the fun of it was kind of to see the various places we could go, the different outfits, and kind of making them various, sci-fi period pieces in a way. But I think at the end of the day, it kind of just was like shooting yourself in the foot, and I think it created a weaker film at the end of the day, or a weaker continuity. Now I have an abundance to say on the story, the characters, the actors that are appearing in this, but I want to go ahead and pass off the floor now to my buddy Jacob Martin, and we'll get back to my thoughts in just a moment.
Thank you, Anthony A. Perez, for asking me to come aboard your channel once again for this X-Men review series. It's been a while since I have actually seen X-Men Apocalypse. The last time I've actually seen this film was actually back in 2016 in its opening weekend when it came out in theaters. I've had the DVD for several years, but I've never actually revisited it. So it was very interesting revisiting this one because this came out, like I said, in 2016, 2 years after the amazing Days of Future Past, which, in my opinion, is still the best X-Men movie. That and Logan are neck and neck for me. This film was once again directed by Bryan Singer, who previously directed films like Days of Future Past and the first two X-Men movies. More of a controversial director nowadays because of some scandals in his personal life, but I'm looking more of the quality of his movies and the direction in this video, and we'll definitely separate the art from the artist when talking about him. Because I do think, controversies aside, he made some pretty good movies. This movie, I gotta be honest, when I rewatched it, I didn't think it was near as enjoyable as when I first watched it in 2016. When it first came out, I enjoyed it. I think just seeing a comic book film in theaters, I think it kind of enhances the experience, and you tend to overlook some of the flaws that the movie does have, and you just kind of enjoy like the cool stuff that happened in this movie. And there are some cool stuff in this movie. Like, there's a couple of action stuff that are really awesome. The Quicksilver scene where he's saving people from the decaying mansion set to Sweet Dreams by Eurythmics. Fantastic sequence. I even think it's better than the Quicksilver scene in Days of Future Past. It was well done. I got goosebumps watching it. It was visually amazing. Anything involving Magneto in this movie, fantastic. I like the opening stuff with Magneto. Felt almost like a short film pretty much, where you think Magneto's going to have peace once again, but then it gets taken away from him and he gets desperate and angry and vengeful. And there's one moment in the movie where he's literally yelling at God going, "Is this what you want from me? Is this what I am?" Michael Fassbender really sells the emotion of that moment. And I'm like, man, there's seeds of a great movie in here. And I also love the Wolverine cameo. Wolverine pretty much shows up for an extended fan service bit. I mean, it's Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. I always enjoy that. But it was one of the better Wolverine action sequences because he really goes full on beast mode, and it pretty much goes all the way up. It pretty much tests the limits of what you could do in a PG-13 film. And watching it now, especially now that we have Logan, this was pretty much the precursor to what we saw in Logan, which really went all for it with its R rating. So there's good moments in there, but the movie overall is such a mess. Like, especially after the highs that Bryan Singer gave us in Days of Future Past, this one felt much more hollow in comparison. I think because, Days of Future Past, I think after how amazing that movie was, I feel like Bryan Singer was trapped in a box because, we had Days of Future Past, which had all the time travel and all that amazing stuff, and the stakes were so high in that movie. Here, because, we're in the 80s, this just felt tame in comparison. He tried establishing a capable villain that could do earth-shattering into the world stuff with the character Apocalypse, but Apocalypse sucks as a villain. Like, I could not take this character one bit seriously. Like, the character design is so goofy. He looks like something you'd see in one of them old Power Rangers episodes. It looks so cringy to watch. And the sad thing is you got a great actor like Oscar Isaac playing this character, but the character has almost nothing to do. The character's not remotely threatening in the slightest. There's so much lazy writing with this character too. Like, he decides the world is terrible because he touches a TV and sees just random stuff, and he's pretty upset about that. That's just lazy writing to me. And his motivations make no sense. Like, there's one part of the movie where he launches all the nuclear missiles out of the earth and people think he's good, but then he destroys the world the next scene. So I don't know what his motivation is. Does he want to be a conqueror, or does he want to be this like hero type figure? I have no idea. The character made no sense to me. He recruits these 4 horsemen to be his allies, and I get why Magneto would join him because of the loss and pain that he's felt over the years, but none of the other characters I could buy why they're joining Apocalypse. Like, I don't know why Storm is part of this group, and some of these other characters who have no motivation at all to join him. This movie is overall just a clunky mess with so many characters that with motivations that make little to no sense in this movie. I will give the movie credit. There's good performances, like Michael Fassbender and James McAvoy are always excellent as Charles Xavier and Magneto. And I guess on paper it's interesting seeing characters from other X-Men films, Storm, Cyclops, Jean Grey, and all that. But none of these actors could replicate what the original actors could do in the original movies. And it's very frustrating because the movie wants you to emotionally care for these characters, but, I just couldn't because I've seen better versions of these characters in previous movies, some of which Bryan Singer directed previously. And I felt like, because this to me felt more like a studio obligation movie more than anything else, I felt like Singer was on autopilot in this movie. Like, he pretty much took a hodgepodge of better scenes in other X-Men movies and like sprinkled them all into this movie, and it just doesn't have the same weight or creative charm that his previous X-Men movies were. Like, even the final exchange with Professor X and Magneto, it's the same dialogue in the first X-Men movie, but in different contexts, and it just doesn't hit the same way that he did it in the original movie with the original actors, and it's such a shame, unfortunately.
Doesn't it ever wake you up in the middle of the night? The feeling that someday they'll come for you and your children.
I feel a great swirl of pity for the poor soul that comes to my school looking for trouble.
Some of the CGI in this movie, while there's some good visual sequences in there, like the already mentioned Quicksilver scene, some of the CGI, especially in the final battle, to me just came off as unfocused and unpolished. And there's some shots I'm like, how did this not get processed better in the editing room and post-production? Like, some of these shots look rough. How did this not get any more polished? I'm shocked by how bad some of the effects are in this movie. And some of the continuity errors don't really add up. Like, there's characters like Nightcrawler and Angel who were in this movie when they weren't really established until the original trilogy, which I'm shocked that these errors were made, considering Bryan Singer made the original X-Men movies. So that's the problem with the X-Men movies, is, because you had Days of Future Past, which involved time travel. After Days of Future Past, the continuity was even more complicated and confusing, and you don't know if X-Men Apocalypse is supposed to be a prequel to the original 3 X-Men movies, or it's in its own timeline, and it started to not make sense after a while. And as much as I love Jennifer Lawrence, she is sleepwalking through this entire movie. Like, you can tell after Days of Future Past, she started not to care about this character anymore. Because I loved her character in First Class and Days of Future Past. She had a fantastic character arc, especially in Days of Future Past. And I felt like this movie completely wasted her character. And, like, she's not even in the blue makeup for most of the movie. And it's kind of a contradiction to what she was in the previous 2 films. Like, she told everybody, hey, I'm mutant and proud. And here she's Jennifer Lawrence most of the movie because she's scared of her powers once again. I'm like, well, you went like 10 steps backward with her character because you got an actress who doesn't want to be in the makeup for most of the movie. Yeah, that was like deja vu, unnecessary, and it didn't feel like a step forward for a character, more like 10 steps backward. And Beast as well, like he's not in the Beast stuff until like the third act of the movie. And I thought, Mystique inspired him to embrace his abilities, and he's trying to control it as well. Like, I don't know what you're doing with these characters, but it's not working for me. This movie all around is a mess. There's a couple good stuff in this movie. I like some individual sequences in this film. A couple good performances in there. But after Days of Future Past, this was a major step down for me. The movie did not know what it wanted to do. None of the characters that are set up in this movie are interesting or compelling in any way. Apocalypse is such a lame villain, one of the worst comic book villains I've seen in quite a while, and thankfully Oscar Isaac redeemed himself as Moon Knight. He was more amazing in that role compared to his Apocalypse character, which was another waste of a talent. The visuals are very inconsistent all over the place, and Bryan Singer, this is easily the weakest X-Men film that he did as a director compared to all the other X-Men movies that are beloved and cherished and loved by many, many comic book fans past and present. This one is just lackluster, forgettable, and just felt like, to me, a studio obligation X-Men film. I felt like Days of Future Past felt like a better end to his run of X-Men movies than this. And it was definitely the beginning of the end of the Fox era of the X-Men franchise. Because aside from Logan and Deadpool 2, some of the other later films just definitely didn't stick the landing compared to other films in the franchise. So this one, I don't think it's held up for me since I originally saw it. I think it's a pretty disappointing movie all around. I'll be giving X-Men Apocalypse a 2.5 out of 5 stars. And on my 100-point scale, it's getting a 46 out of 100. Thank you, Anthony, for having me on your channel once again, talking about X-Men Apocalypse. I think I rambled on a little longer than I was intending to, but seeing how I originally gave it a positive grade back in 2016 and rewatching it definitely wasn't near as good as I remembered it, I definitely had a lot to say about this movie. I can't wait to hear what your thoughts on X-Men Apocalypse are. I'm curious if you enjoy this film or not, because I know you have your own preferences on the X-Men films, and you've read all the comics, which I haven't, and I know you've been picky on some of the choices in some of these Fox X-Men movies, so I'm curious what you're going to think of this one. I'm sure Anthony will leave links in the description below where you can check out my YouTube channel, where I also do movie reviews, TV reviews, and other fun stuff along the way. Anthony, I won't hog up too much any more of your time. I'm sure this video will be long enough as it is. I can't wait to hear your thoughts on Apocalypse, so back to you.
A big thanks to Jacob for joining me here in this video. Always a pleasure to have you on, my friend, and I loved hearing your thoughts. There's a lot about this film that we definitely agree on. I would say that on my rewatch, I think I enjoyed it a little bit more than you, but not that much more. And yeah, we do have a lot of similar thoughts on this. I do agree that one of the best moments in this entire movie is that scene with Magneto where he's lost his family and, he calls out to God saying, "Is this what you want from me? Is this what I am?" I think that's a great scene. I also really enjoy the scene that we have with Wolverine because it's just cool to see Hugh Jackman, and as you guys have heard me say multiple times in these videos, I think he's easily one of the best parts of these films. I think most people would agree, and his role as Wolverine is just never boring to watch, and I just really thoroughly enjoy seeing him in that role in this film once again. But kind of leaning into all the conversation on continuity, it is heartbreaking to see them just kind of throw Wolverine around in all of these films and just kind of alter everything about the way he became Weapon X in all of these films. We've seen the different iterations of him becoming Weapon X or being Weapon X or escaping multiple times, from X-Men 2 to X-Men Origins Wolverine to The Wolverine, and now to this. It just feels so inconsistent, and we've had 3 different actors play William Stryker that have all kind of given us a different take on the character that don't align in any way, shape, or form. As for our returning cast, they're great. James McAvoy is fantastic in this, Michael Fassbender. Those two right out of the gate are easily the best part of this movie and easily my favorite part of all of these films. I just think that they're so good. They are the best recastings of these younger versions of these characters, and without a doubt, I think they bring it and they come to play in this movie. Nicholas Hoult is also great as Beast again, but it feels like he was kind of sidelined in this movie, like he doesn't have an abundance to do until the third act of the film. And that's kind of one of my biggest issues with this film overall, is there's a lot going on, but also not a lot going on. We have Oscar Isaac coming into this film playing Apocalypse. And when I heard Apocalypse was going to be the next villain, or when I saw the post-credit scene for Days of Future Past, I was thrilled. As a longtime X-Men comic book fan, there are so many issues of the comic books that have dealt with Apocalypse, and he is just one of the greatest characters. The first ever mutant who, really brings this terror in a lot of the stories that he's involved in. Whether it's a video game, one of the animated shows, or the comic books themselves, Apocalypse has always been a huge threat that really always heightens the stakes and the story that he's involved in. And so to see this movie and them kind of give us a cookie cutter version of what, Apocalypse is a shame. I do think that Oscar Isaac does a good job in the role for what he was given, but I think a lot of the issues that I have with Apocalypse have more to do with them kind of not really giving him his due diligence in the writing. The writing is really what makes this film pretty weak, because Apocalypse comes and he wants to conquer the Earth and have the mutants take control of the Earth once again, and he sets up his 4 horsemen in the film, and as Jacob said, they don't really have a whole lot of motivation. Magneto is the only one that really has motivation to join Apocalypse, and he's really the only character that's part of the Horsemen that is given any sort of characterization. Beyond that, we have Psylocke, played by Olivia Munn in this film, who we have seen in a previous film as far as the character of Psylocke, and they did nothing with her. And yeah, she really doesn't have much of a character. Olivia Munn is a beautiful actress, but she really wasn't given much to do in this film when it comes to the narrative. She looks great in that, comic book accurate outfit. She looks dope in some of the action, and there's some really cool action with all of these characters, but ultimately they don't do much with her. Then you have Ben Hardy, who plays Angel in this film, which this iteration is like a punk, kind of metalhead, just wanting to get drunk kind of guy. He's a little bit crazy. He's really rough and tough, and it doesn't align at all with the version that we would see in X-Men 3, The Last Stand. It really doesn't make any sense at all that Angel is even in this film in terms of timeline, just like his age versus what he would be in X-Men The Last Stand. But yeah, it just feels like, Bryan Singer and the writers wanted to bring Angel back in to give us Archangel, which is cool to see, but again, his character is given practically nothing. I feel like we got more out of Angel from the opening scene of X-Men The Last Stand, where he's trying to cut his wings off, and his dad barges into the room and sees him cutting his wings and realizes his son's a mutant. I feel like we garnered more about that character in that scene than we do anything with him in this movie, even if there is some cool action with his character. Then we have Alexandra Shipp as Storm in this, and we finally get to see Storm with that comic book accurate, mohawk, which was really cool. I think the actress looks great in the role, and she could have made for a really good Storm in these movies, but ultimately they don't really do much with her in this movie again. And we find her character in Egypt in this movie, even though she's an African character, and they've really never done that part of her character right. And a lot of my issues with this movie overall have to do with a lot of the new cast, and I feel like the way the movie wants me to feel about these new cast members when they really haven't earned their role, in my opinion. The writing doesn't really do much to make these iterations, these younger iterations of these characters, really powerful when you really think about it. I still always am going to prefer the original 3 X-Men films in terms of their cast, because they really felt like the characters. I talked about it in those reviews, like whatever issues those films have, yeah, that's one thing, but they without a doubt had plenty of elements that really felt like the characters from the comic books, and the casting was really good on that level. So to see certain people like Sophie Turner in this film as Jean Grey, beautiful actress, I think she does fine, but they don't really do much with her character, and then they bring the whole Phoenix thing in by the end of the movie, and then the whole next movie is about her, and then that movie is a mess. So it is a damn shame that Sophie Turner wasn't given the due diligence in the writing to really have an exciting Jean Grey narrative. Ultimately, she just kind of feels very one note throughout most of this movie, and it is a damn shame. Speaking on Jean Grey though, really quickly, it's funny, there's a scene in the movie where the X-Men kind of sneak out of the mansion, or at least the young guys. You got Cyclops, Jean Grey, you know, Nightcrawler and the rest of the gang, and they go to watch a movie, Return of the Jedi. They go to watch the third Star Wars film of the time. And it's funny, when they walk out, they're talking about which is better and which one's worse, and Jean Grey makes the comment of, well, we always know that the third is the worst. And it's funny that they would say that in the movie, because it's clearly Bryan Singer trying to make a comment at the third X-Men film being the worst, which is the one that he didn't direct. And then here he is directing the third in this set of movies, and it's one of the worst. Then we have Ty Sheridan in this movie as Cyclops, Scott Summers. And if you saw my review for First Class that I did with the Big Rob Theory, we both talked about the fact that it was just so disappointing to have Cyclops appear later on and not really have him have much time with his brother, Havoc, played by Lucas Till, who reprises his role here, but is kind of killed off in the weakest of ways. He tries to kill Apocalypse and ends up destroying the entire X-Mansion and himself, giving us a really cool Quicksilver scene, but ultimately was just kind of a throwaway moment to kill Havoc, which sucks, because anybody who was familiar with the comic books when it comes to the Summers brothers, there are so many great things they could have done when it comes to Cyclops and his brother Havoc being together, teaming up, and giving us just this big blast of energy beams and tons of great action with the two of them working side by side. Anybody who's familiar with these characters in any of the animated stuff and the video games and the comics, yeah, there's so much they could have done with those two characters together, and it's a damn shame that they just decided to kill off Havoc in this movie. Then they bring back Rose Byrne in this movie, and she's just wasted for me in these films, to be completely honest. I liked her role in First Class, but then they end up wiping her memory. She's non-existent in Days of Future Past, and now we have this, you know, kind of new romance building again in this film with James McAvoy's Xavier, as he eventually ends up giving her memories back, and she comes on this adventure with them again, and it just felt pointless. I just feel like they don't really do much with Moira McTaggart in this film and these films in general, and her role just it's a waste. It's kind of a shame, because she's a fantastic actress, but I just don't feel like they really gave her much to do in this movie or in these movies overall. The first one, First Class, yeah, definitely, you know, given more to do, but wiping her memory, just, I don't really see what purpose that served in the narrative at all. Let's talk about Nightcrawler, because if you saw my review for X-Men 2, you know that Nightcrawler is my favorite X-Men, and I love what they did in that film with Alan Cummings. I really enjoyed his performance as Nightcrawler in that film, and Nightcrawler for me has always been my favorite X-Men. As a kid, watching the original X-Men animated series, I just always thought his power was so cool, that he looked so cool, and anytime I could play him in a video game, like the X-Men Legends games or anything like that, I was always on board. And yeah, in this movie, he's played by a new actor, played by Cody Smith McPhee. You know, this is an actor who's really good. I've seen him in other things. He's a good actor. He just did not really sell it for me here. And again, continuity-wise, it makes no sense when we know that the X-Men would not come across Nightcrawler until the events of X-Men 2 a few decades later. Again, I guess you could say the timeline is jacked because of Days of Future Past, but it just seems like a lazy excuse to bring in Nightcrawler. And as much as I love Nightcrawler, I just wish they'd done more with him, you know? He's fine in this movie, but they don't really give him an abundance to do, and most of what he does do in this movie is just kind of whatever, you know what I mean? It doesn't feel like the Nightcrawler that I know and that I really enjoy. He has much better scenes in X-Men Dark Phoenix, but yeah, ultimately, I'm not crazy with this interpretation of Nightcrawler, which is a shame because I love Nightcrawler. This one's a quick one I just want to touch on. Lana Condor as Jubilee. Jubilee has made small cameo appearances by different actresses from the very beginning of these X-Men films, and fans have wanted to see Jubilee have real screen time at some point in one of these movies. If you go back to the original X-Men series, she is the first character we follow from that show, and she's one of the most iconic X-Men. But over the years, she's kind of lost that star power across, you know, the fandom, simply because they've completely underutilized her character. And I remember people being excited that they were finally going to bring Jubilee into this movie, and she's in it, but she doesn't do anything. They don't really bring her on any adventures. She doesn't really ever use her powers, and it's a damn shame. And then the last cast member that I have to talk about here is a small role played by Thomas Lemarquis. He plays the character of Caliban, who is kind of the reason that Apocalypse is able to find some of the other mutants, and is the reason that he ends up meeting Olivia Munn as Psylocke. And what's funny about Caliban is that this movie came out in 2016, and just the next year, Logan would come out, and Caliban is in that film as well, played by a completely different actor, that time around played by Stephen Merchant. And yeah, it's already come out and been official, if I'm not mistaken, that the reason that happened was because the creators of the two films were not speaking to one another, and they did not know that they both planned on using the same character. Again, a mess. Just a mess when it comes to continuity in these films. As much as there are films in this franchise that are some of my favorite films and some of the most iconic films in my childhood of all time, it is heartbreaking to know that they just didn't really have any oversight into making these films feel cohesive. So when you go back and rewatch these films today and do a huge binge like I've been doing, it's just heartbreaking because you don't really feel like you can fully connect to every element and every character all the time, because they're going to kind of disregard something that you may have liked, or maybe even change something that you didn't like, but then kind of disregard that later on. It's heartbreaking, to be completely honest. Beyond all these characters and my specific thoughts on all of them, I do find this to be an entertaining film in a lot of ways. There is some great action, there's a great score, and it's just a good, fun X-Men movie at certain points. However, the narrative does just feel hollow, and I just feel like a lot of the characters are not given an abundance to do. And I just remembered I didn't mention Jennifer Lawrence as Mystique, who, yeah, you know, kind of what Jacob said before, she was so good in Days of Future Past, and if you saw my review for First Class, you know, I wasn't a huge fan of her portrayal in that movie. I just felt like she just didn't really feel like the right fit for the role. And then Days of Future Past came out, and I felt like she was far more in line with Mystique, and I really enjoyed her performance in that film. And at this point with this one, and then with Dark Phoenix, it just felt like she was sleepwalking through the role. And again, I want to make it abundantly clear, as I've said in these other videos, I think Jennifer Lawrence is great. She's a beautiful actress. I think she's fantastic in so many movies, and it's just a shame. It just feels like she really wasn't fully committed to playing Mystique in this film and the next one. Maybe she was, but something about it just did not feel right to me. And again, continuity wise, it just doesn't make sense to see Mystique in any of the roles that we really see her in, especially at the end of this film where we see them all lined up in their, you know, kind of classic X-Men outfits. She doesn't even have ties to the X-Men in the original 3 movies, and they just kind of forced it in to these movies, and it just doesn't really work for me. But just to touch on the ending, what a fucking shame that we did not get to see those characters in those outfits in the next movie. What were they thinking? I really don't know what they were thinking in terms of continuity and giving fans what they wanted. So overall, X-Men Apocalypse is a hodgepodge of a lot of inconsistencies in the franchise, with a lot of great performances throughout and some great action. Some visual effects that are definitely not as strong as some of the previous films, but a lot of really great moments. There are, you know, YouTube clips of this movie that are epic and a lot of fun to watch and keep me engaged while I'm watching it. And there's so much great potential, but the fact that, you know, it just kind of became a jokey movie now where Oscar Isaac is kind of teased for being, you know, a Ivan Ooze lookalike. Yeah, you know, it's just a damn shame that this movie wasn't as good as it could have been. Apocalypse is one of the greatest villains in all of Marvel Comics, and honestly, if they ever wanted to bring him into like the MCU, he could be a massive threat not only for the X-Men characters, but for the Avengers and for the Marvel Cinematic Universe overall. He is on the scale of something like a Thanos or Kang the Conqueror or Galactus. They just did not portray that here, you know, and that's really heartbreaking. I really highly recommend checking out some of the animated stuff, reading some of the comics as well. But I actually, you know, a couple of years ago during the pandemic, ended up rewatching X-Men Evolution, and what they do with Apocalypse and that show alone, even though it's pretty brief, it is 10 times better than what they did with Apocalypse here. And it's a damn shame that that's the case when we get a live action interpretation of one of the most iconic characters in all of X-Men history. So a big thanks to you guys for watching. Overall, I think this is a movie that has a lot of positives and a lot of negatives that ultimately kind of leaves me feeling like, I don't really know how I fully feel about it. So that's why I don't rate things here on the channel, because I feel like it will change every day depending on kind of how I'm feeling. But for now, I'll leave the question in your hands. Do you guys like this movie? Do you not like this movie? Do you feel like it's a complete failure in the franchise? Definitely can't wait to hear what you guys have to say down below. Leave those comments, hit that like button, subscribe for more videos. Go check out Jacob's channel. The link is down below in the description box, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.